Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Loretta Besson, and I am a retirement plan specialist here at Goulden and McCarthy. I would like to welcome you to our Financial Wellness Program series of webinars. I am joined today by Gigi Mondavi, Defined Contribution Specialist at MFS Fund Distributors, who will cover the presentation on Savvy Women, Savvy Investors. This presentation will focus on some key financial matters we face at each stage of life and how we can bring financial awareness and confidence to women along the way. As a reminder, our team at Goulden and McCarthy is always available to help answer any questions you may have regarding this presentation or your financial plan more broadly. I will provide our contact information again following the presentation. We will not be taking questions during this session, so again, any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to our office. And with that, I will turn it over to Gigi.
Thank you so much, Loretta. It's an absolute pleasure to be here this morning presenting to all of you on Savvy Women, Smart Investors. As she mentioned, my name is Gigi Mondavi. I work with MFS Investments. A little bit of background about our firm. We manage about $500 billion in global assets around the world. We have 9 global offices. And it's an absolute pleasure because in addition to managing assets for retirement, we get an opportunity to present on educational content to help individuals make sure that they're making the right financial decisions for their future. So for me in particular, I am a defined contribution specialist. It's an easier way of saying, fancy way of saying I work with 401ks and DC plan participants and sponsors, employees and employers in helping educate on topics that need to be discussed. And today we're going to be focusing over the next 30 to 40 minutes on Savvy Women Smart Investors and really just highlighting and providing a thought leadership on how and what you should be thinking about in the different life stages that you're going through or may know someone who's going through them. So what I always say is when you're going through this presentation, just put it in the back of your mind that some of this information may not be exactly relevant to you, but it most likely is relevant to someone you know, whether it's a daughter, a sister, your mother, your aunt, or just a loved one or friends. This is information that everyone goes through at every stage of their life. And some of the things are relevant to you and some of them are just great information to have in the back of your mind. And with Loretta bringing us and the Goulden and McCarthy bringing us in to help educate, it just really provides you more of a financial understanding of the fact is we can have these conversations about being a female in the workforce and just a female in general making up half of the population and the conversations and questions you should be asking during different life stages. So this is going to be one of the topics, just top level. Know your financial matters at each life stage, navigate them, recognize that we do have unique situations that we do face throughout the different generations, and then also just providing you with answers and solutions and questions to be able to ask at different parts. So overall, this will just be covering the early life, the midlife, and the late. Oops, sorry, I just minimized that. Going over the bigger topics of each of these major life stages. Obviously, we're going to go in order, so starting with early, mid to late. But to give you a little bit of perspective, we're going to go back in time. And I want you to think, and this may be a personal question, but just think about your personal relationships that you have or you know people who have. Whether it's 1 year you've been with someone or 30 years, great if you've made it that far, awesome. Or past relationships or current relationships. Reason I want you to kind of think back on that is because there's no secret recipe. There's no, rule book that you have to go by to say, this is how you're going to be perfect in a relationship. This is what's going to make you succeed financially and personally happy. There's none of that out there. But if you go back to the 1950s, in the home economics teaching textbook to high schoolers, they legitimately thought there was a rule book on how to be a good housewife. And this is an actual excerpt image that was taken out of a home economics textbook. And it really said what needs to be done as a female to make a household happy. Let's just go back through some of the things that were being discussed during that time. It's not on the presentation, but in front of me, because we like to not condone anything that is said in this excerpt of this home economics textbook. But to give you a little bit of perspective, there was 15 rules that came in after this photo. So I'm just going to list out 2 of them. Listen to him. You may have a dozen things to tell him, but the moment of his arrival is not the time. Let him talk first. What's another one that they said? Prepare yourself. Take 15 minutes to rest so that you will be refreshed when he arrives. He has just been with a lot of work-weary people. Be a little happy and a little more interesting. His boring day may need a lift. Greet him with a smile. I don't know about you, but if I had to live by any of these rules, these 2 in particular, I would not make it very far in my relationships. The good thing, though, is that in the 1970s, there was a huge female initiative change, and it started changing the level playing field as far as women in the workforce and just women making their own decisions professionally, financially, and for themselves. So what are we looking at today? Today, we are looking at, sorry, a little sensitive. Today, we're looking at 49% of females are their primary breadwinners. Not only that, 51% of females and women in the workforce now make up management and professional occupations and are taking on leadership roles. So you go from the 1950s, where they're teaching females how to be, the best housewife they can be, to the 70s, where the movement started changing of females saying, you know what, we want to have equal participation, equal leadership opportunities, and just be as known in the workforce as male counterparts, to today, where we are making up 50% of the workforce population, and we're taking on huge roles. And actually, for the first time, females have out-earned men in post-secondary education. The only thing that has not been addressed throughout all of these great changes are the conversations around the finances. And what we as a firm at MFS have been doing over the last 5 years is trying to understand and also work and be able to tailor down the biggest issues that come across life stages that have a financial impact when it ultimately comes to saving for retirement. So here we are today, and what I like to call is, this conversation is all about being financially selfish. No one will ever judge you for making the financial decisions to help yourself, your bottom line, help your family, and just overall make your life a little bit easier when you have these conversations put out in front of you. Early life stages. So let's think back, doesn't matter how old you are, but I want to put us back into our 20s. You're coming right out of college, or maybe even doing some part-time jobs, and then you probably solidify your full-time job. Maybe you're moving a whole bunch of times. A lot of things happen in your 20s, and ultimately I think we can all agree a lot of mistakes are made in your 20s. This is where it is so important to establish a financial foundation to make sure that you're successfully setting yourself up for when you go through major financial decisions later in life. The statistics out there right now is that at least every college graduate, in addition to having high student debt, will come out with about 5 to 6 credit cards, ultimately affecting their credit score, which does hinder their ability to make financial purchases later in life. So one of the biggest things, if you're in your early 20s or 30s, or just in general, is really understanding the impact of the money that you bring in and how are you allocating out to your expenses. Credit cards being the biggest thing that people take on at a young age, and not knowing the implications that it can cause on a financial assessment to your assets. And the scary thing about credit cards today is at the click of a button on your cell phone, you can get registered and you can get approved for a credit card within minutes, and the credit card automatically gets transferred into your smartphone and you can swipe away within 15 minutes of being approved. The reality is, though, that how easy it is to become approved and to take on additional credit. They do not lay out the repercussions of what happens when you do not pay your bills on time. So one of the things that easiest way to care for your credit at a young age is understanding what goes into your credit score. So what impacts it? The amount you owe on your current loans, interest rates on your current debt, payment history, length of credit history, credit mix, and current salary. Now, one of these do not belong as far as understanding the credit score. And this is the one thing that people mistakenly do when they come out of college and are being employed for the first time or receiving a higher employment salary. And the one thing is the current salary. Perfect example for me is I have 3 amazing older sisters. I have been very fortunate to learn some of my success financially is because I've seen them make their mistakes. So I have a sister, she thought she was going to become a lawyer after she went through college, went to paralegal school. You know, we have to become a lawyer, you're gonna hopefully make a lot of money in time. She ended up realizing and overspending on her credit score because she had the assumption that she was going to be coming out of college and she was going to be making a lot of money. So she racked up a whole lot of debt, ultimately to decide that she was not going to become a lawyer. What happens? She ends up having to move home, having to get herself financially situated before she was able to go through her life and make her career change and realize, A, she did not want to become a lawyer. She was not going to bring in that much money that she thought she was. And thank God for her, you know, 10 years later, she's on her feet, she's successful. But the reality is she didn't have the realization of what went into a credit score with the assumption that she was going to be making X, Y, Z for her salary, and that didn't happen, which financially hindered her. So how do you make sure that you have a healthy credit score in the future? So you always pay up your bills on time. Set up automatic payments if possible. Try and keep the credit card balances as low as needed. And only open up a credit card when needed. Again, the average person comes out of college with 5 to 6 credit cards opened, not necessarily needed for what you want to do in life. And also it just adds more to the liability of taking on additional debt that you need to try and avoid. Another thing that you should at least get in the habit of doing every single year is checking your credit score. So these are 2 resources that you can use, creditkarma.com, annualcreditreport.com. We always suggest to check it at least twice a year or once a year to just make sure that you're staying on top of your financial needs and able to pay off bills. Another thing to understand in your 20s or your early career is setting up a budget for your financial foundation. Again, this is where I talk about being financially selfish, is understanding where your money is being allocated to. So this is a basic rule of thumb that we advise on, and it's the 50-30-20% rule. 50% to your necessities, 30% to your wants, 20% for your financial goals, such as retirement. This varies for everyone. I'm going to take me for an example. You cannot see me on screen, but I have very, very, very curly hair. Now, before you discount me and say, what is this girl talking about her curly hair for? Because my hair is so curly, I have to spend money on my hair products. It's a very trivial thing, but for me, I have budgeted out that my 50% of my necessities, which include my housing, my food, my insurance, my benefits, I cover all of those things, my gas, my car. One of my necessities that I make sure I prioritize is my hair product. I do not believe I could ever leave the house without it. And so I put that into my 50% necessity. What does that mean though? That means I have to be aware of where I need to save on the other side. So what do I not do in my wants, my 30% wants? I do certain things like make my own lunch. I make my own coffee. I prefer to walk places rather than Uber. And I have trained myself to cut costs where possible. So when it comes to my hair products, I can afford it in that 50% category. Varies for each individual, but this is a great baseline to also work off of understanding your credit score, pulling up your payment histories, and seeing exactly where your dollars are being allocated, because it's very important to understand obviously what's coming into your bank account, but how are you spending those dollars out of it? The 20% financial goal is what we really want to focus on today. Ultimately, all these decisions that you make financially will set you up for a better future for retirement or as you get older and taking care of others. Why is it such an important thing to dedicate time and understanding that the 20% that you should allocate towards your retirement can have a huge implication on your financial nest egg when you go to retire? This is going to be taking a hypothetical. And what this is the power of compounding interest. The most basic way to describe compounding interest, just bear with me, but you go into, say you're going to go play out in the snow and you want to make a snowman. You start with a small snowball and you start rolling it and it becomes bigger, and then it becomes bigger, and you start compacting snow in it and it becomes bigger and bigger. And at the end of the, however long it takes you, you're going to have a snowman. But the idea being that you start off with something small, and with compounding interest, you have the ability to grow it into a much, much bigger asset pool for when you go to retire. So this is going to be taking 3 different hypotheticals over a 40-year period and how aggressive you are or not with the markets and staying invested. So $1,000 each. We're going to take the first one, which is a 3% return. So this is saying that you're going to be having a very conservative approach when it comes to investing, whether you're going to be sitting most of the time in cash or you're just going to take a very heavy fixed income allocated portfolio, and you're going to only aim to receive 3% per year through all market cycles. So this is going to be including the great financial crisis, the tech bubble, going back into this Black Monday of '89, you're going backwards 40 years. And what do you ultimately get? You get a decent sized return, but at 3%, it doesn't really go that far. Let's put it down. So it comes out after 40 years, $3,200. Now, let's say you're going to get slightly more aggressive. You're going to go a little bit more heavier on the equity and the international exposure, and you're going to really listen into any of the market updates. You're going to connect with your HR anytime someone comes through, and you're going to just make sure that you're confident in your investment selection to participate in the market through the up and down times. Ultimately, that 6% return, which is pretty fair, it's going to end up making your $1,000 investment over 40 years equivalent to $10,000. Now, say you're very aggressive in how you're going to approach your finances and you have the 10% return. Ultimately, you can see that through this time period of over 40 years, your $1,000 investment, not touching it, not even adding additional fees to amount to it, will equate to almost $45,000. So the idea of compounding interest is really thinking small increments that can make a huge interest while you're investing over the long term. And this is why that 20% allocation is so important to get in the habit of doing very, very young, whether it's $20 or you're opening up different accounts. It's a very easy financial foundation to make a big difference over the long term when you're going to be investing in your retirement for 40 years, ideally starting at 22 and ending around 65, 67 years old. It goes a long way to set you up financially in the future. Now, one of the big things today is obviously to be financially selfish, as in you take the ownership of what your finances are capable of doing, how you invest it and how you allocate it and spend it out through that household budget and different methodologies. The other aspect of today that is very beneficial for the work balance is the offerings that benefits of companies will offer you. Training like this is a great example to help you stay on top of your knowledge and questions to be aware of asking. But a lot of things to take advantage of is through your company. Always, and I say always, check with HR at least once a year. I myself set up a calendar reminder various points throughout the year to just make sure I'm brushing up on any HR announcements that have happened, whether it's regarding my benefits, my 401k updates, or even just reaching out to our HR to have a financial conversation with someone who's coming in to make sure I'm right on track. And this is where it comes down to take advantage of what the company is offering you. If there's a 401k company match, if there's a vesting period, the health insurance options, one of the biggest ones right now that's being, talked about around in the industry as an employee is HSA benefits, and trying to understand which avenue and which offer is right for you. Maternity, paternity, adoption leave. Those are constantly evolving, and it's always good information to know before you're going to be going into that life stage of maybe having kids and what your options are. Tuition reimbursement, obviously, as the younger generation is graduating, we are very much higher in debt coming out of college than it was in the previous generations. So any aspect that you can have the opportunity to have conversations around tuition reimbursement or saving or even refinancing are extremely helpful to help your bottom line to, again, allocate those dollars to that 20% financial goal. All in all, when it comes to the early life stages of being in your 20s, your 30s, it's most important for your financial foundation to set up the healthy credit score, make a budget, save steadily. A lot of people get caught up in the fact that they're not saving a whole bunch or a decent amount, so it deters them from putting any allocation aside for their retirement. At the end of the day, it always comes down to even $20, $25, $100. Anytime you get a promotion, get in the habit of increasing your contributions, because of that compounding interest, it really makes a huge difference when you're looking over a 40-year period. So I don't have to say much, but I think it's pretty evident that middle life stages, it gets more complicated. By this time, you're thinking probably marriage, maybe you have a few kids, maybe your parents are getting older. A lot of things happen during this stage of the life that you just need to make sure that you are aware of before planning or thinking about considering doing different things. The number one reason for divorce today is finances. Usually money is the hottest topic that comes up, so much so that there was a study done. It was a survey that was asked of just random people, and this was listing out what they would rather talk about or do rather than having the conversation around money with their significant other. 34% said they'd rather sit in traffic for 1 hour. 34% said they would rather have an embarrassing photo posted of them. 20% said they would rather sit in jail for the day. And then 16% said they would rather watch an awkward sex scene with their parents rather than talking finances with their significant other or their spouse. The reality of this is really just to have the conversation. A personal story of mine, I was in a relationship, 18 months into it, we started having these financial conversations, and a lot of these things you don't see when you're seeing someone, and it comes down to his ability. He had high credit debt and he had high student loans. So when I found out, me working in the financial industry and actually caring about a lot of the finances and early decisions that can hinder or help you, it became not a heated topic, but we made an 18-month game plan to get him out of debt on certain aspects. And ultimately, he actually did it in 12 months, which was amazing. But the reality is we had the conversation. It was an uncomfortable conversation. But at the end of the day, what I always told him when we were going through the process, I said, it's struggles today, we'll be thankful that they happened in the future. So the decisions and the tough decisions of cutting out certain expenses in our life, not splurging as much on going out, ultimately helped him in the future financially. And it increased once he got his debt under control, then he was able to increase allocations. And it becomes just a spiral effect of being able to raise your financial foundation and make sure that whatever happens in the future, regardless of building a family, that you're going to be set in any major financial decisions. So these are just a list of different ways to have the conversations. Again, it's one of those things that people try and kick the can down the road, but it ultimately just hinders the outcome if you're not open in making those conversations or having those deep financial decisions. You have to recognize, one of you are a giver, one of you are a taker. There are people who spend more and there are people who save more. And you have to be comfortable with having those conversations of the threshold. One of my rule of thumbs in life is that if it's over $300 of anything that I'm going to be making a purchase of, I have to save at least double that money to put into savings. So if it's $300, I save enough to put $300 in savings before I make the purchase of that $300 item. It's a rule of thumb that I've integrated into my life. It's an easy habit, and it just makes sure that I'm saving just as much as I'm spending and being responsible in any big purchases that you may or may not be making down the road. The single American woman. So no, this photo is not flipping you off that you may think it is. But the reality is, for the first time, single women are outnumbering married women. And this is through elective or either death, divorce, or elective on the finances. 90% of females are going to be solely responsible for their finances at one point in their life, based off all the scenarios I just said. The elective, they're choosing to be financially independent. Through death, their spouse passes away, they have to take responsibility of their finances. Or divorce, they have a divorce that occurs and they choose that they're going to have to be separating and they're going to have to take on the ownership of their finances, which is why it's so important for females to understand all the financial aspects that can go into everything. And this is not slowing down at any point right now. This is, if anything, growing every single year. And the fact that you're going to be meeting, or you know someone who's going to be electively financially independent at one point in their life. So let's talk about the financial opportunity with a hypothetical. Oops, sorry, just lost this one more time. So this is a great way to understand, again, the compounding interest and how big of an impact it can make on your financial nest egg. So this is taking a basic hypothetical of the perfect scenario. We know life's not perfect, but this gives you a vision of what you can save up to if you let nothing get in your way. And what we're going to be looking at, so cumulative contributions. So you're going to be starting at the age of 22. You're going to do a 3% initial savings rate. That's going to auto escalate, which means every year that 3% is going to increase 1% for up to 10%. So hopefully as your salary increases, that auto escalation is going to increase as well. And then you're going to capitalize on the company match. The company will match 3% plus 50% on the next 3%. This is what the green line shows. And then you participate in the market. You've been going to the market classes, the educational classes that your company is offering, and you've really taken advantage of the volatility in the marketplace and stayed the course of staying invested over the long term. And you can see that with a 6% return and compounding all those positive factors, you're ending with an account balance of $1.3 million, which is a great amount to be ending at retirement. But again, this is the perfect situation to save up for and to look for. But we all know life is complicated and life gets in the way, and there's a lot more aspects and reality points that you come across. So what are some of these points? The first one, so this one's freeze your eggs, free your career. Now, this was a very hot publication that came out on Business Week on Bloomberg. Reason being that 72% of the viewership of this magazine are actually men. So do we think they missed the mark in the audience? Absolutely correct. But is the topic nonetheless a topic that people are having everywhere? Correct. And the reality is that there are more options out there when it comes to raising a family, whether it's through surrogacy, adoption, or freezing your eggs because individuals decide to pursue a career or health reasons. The reality is there's a lot that goes into when you get into this stage of your life that not necessarily is so traditional as what it used to be. For the benefit of today, these conversations are being had, which hopefully will help in the process when making these decisions of building a family. And everyone does have their unique situation to make sure that they're going to have the life that they want. But ultimately, a lot of this stuff is obviously private and personal, but it is something that is out there more commonly than people realize. Another aspect that comes across in life is females are 2 times more likely to leave the workforce to care for a loved one, whether that is raising children, taking care of their loved one, or helping out with grandparents. Females still ineptly are more likely to leave the workforce to take care of someone, which is ultimately a personal decision again, but the conversation comes down to how are you going to help manage and prepare for your finances at retirement. And the last part is it's all a personal decision. There's no cookie cutter way of what should or shouldn't be done. The reality is having a conversation and partnering up with a financial advisor or working with the Golden McCarthy, with Loretta, and having these insights and these conversations and asking questions and seeking out research really helps you make sure that you're making the financial decisions that help you in the long run. And so let's go through a hypothetical scenario that is more realistic to what actually happens when it comes to saving for your finances. So initially we had that $1.3 million nest egg, and that was from the perfect scenario. That was from a perfect situation. And then you can see that the $959,000 deduction is because an individual took 7 years out of the workforce. So on the additional scenarios, which is listed on the left side, someone took a 7-year break, whether it's to raise kids or take care of a loved one, and they stopped contributing to their 401k or their DC plan for the 7 years. What ends up happening because of compounding interest is you can see that it immediately starts chipping away at that retirement nest egg, dropping it to $950,000. Again, more common than not that people do take these financial breaks in their lifetime. The conversation and what should be prepared, if possible, is whether you need to increase your contributions before you leave the workforce, or maybe you need to establish a spousal IRA for the 7 years that you're going to leave the workforce. It's going to be helping you, this is helping you navigate any major decisions to make sure that you're financially allocating for your retirement during that time period. And then say you don't take advantage of the market and investing over a diversified portfolio, and you just sit in cash for a significant amount of time, and you're a little bit scared of going investing all your assets, and you walk away with only a 3% return in your retirement account. Compounding that, you're going to automatically drop down to $450,000. So again, it's very easy to see that you can dwindle at that retirement nest egg very quickly with little financial decisions that you don't realize that you make in your 20s, your 30s, and 40s that ultimately will affect your 50s and 60s and retirement. So it's very important to have these conversations and be proactive in understanding the options that are out there. So today's market obviously is very volatile, and historically we've had lots of volatility. The great conversation to be having and understanding when it comes to investing in your finances, this is a little bit of a lot of information on a screen, but this is highlighting the importance of diversifying your portfolio. And what you can see, and after the presentation as well, I will send out a client bigger friendly copy of this that's very much legible that you can look at. And what it shows is the different asset classes that you can invest in. But what I want you to focus on is that gray box that's going honest, like if you were to look at the screen, it's falling right in the middle of the category. And what that is highlighting is a diversified portfolio. That would be also referred to as one of your, if you're going to look at your retirement, be a target date fund or a diversified asset allocation. This is something that's usually offered to you within the retirement options. And the idea is it's balancing between all the asset categories out there, whether it's small, large, international. A diversified portfolio captures all of it in some aspect, depending on the stage of life that you're in and how aggressive you want to participate in the market. But ultimately what you see is that that gray box with the diversified portfolio minimizes volatility over the long term. Ultimately, you can see it on this last row right here is the outcome over this whole entire 20-year period. And it shows you is if you were to ride or chase certain asset classes, what happens to the next year. What we end up finding is a lot of time investors will either chase the top performing asset class of the previous year, or they chase the underperforming asset class, hoping that it will rebound the next year. And what ends up happening is these decisions, if it was a glass crystal ball, everyone would be perfect in the scenario and would have made all the right decisions. But what happens is it's very hard to time the market and what to invest in, and it's more important about extending your time in the market and diversifying their portfolio. As you can see, this diversified portfolio after the significant amount of time ends up not being a top performer, but it being better than most of the asset classes had you made a sector or a weighting bet on going into certain aspects. It's all about diversification. So another hypothetical, just a different way of viewing this information, is the caregiving need to solidify retirement savings. This is a blank hypothetical that we just updated recently, and it's showing 3 different storylines. Some of it you may be familiar with, some of it not so much, but it's taking the financial aspects of those storylines and putting it right underneath. So you have Karen, Sarah, and Maria. Karen is no caregiver leave. She's in the workforce from the age of 22 till she retires. Now you can see on the bottom lines the amount invested, then the final account value, which is encompassing of the investment into the market and that, retirement solution option. And then you have the amount invested by the employee contribution. That's where the employer company match comes into effect. And then the final account balance below, which is at $1.3 million. And then that bottom row goes to show how much income they can derive from all of their savings on a yearly basis. So Karen's taking no leave, and she's going to have, after retirement, her annual, you can call it income derived from her retirement account, is going to be around $94,000. Now let's take Sarah's situation, for example, is a 7-year break to raise kids or a loved one or her parents or grandparents. And what you can see is she did do save, she saved, she maximized on that company match, but taking that 7-year break, even with the same situation scenario as Karen on the investment part, she comes out with a little bit lower account balance, and her yearly outcome is $67,900. And then we have Maria at the far side. So she works for a few years. She saves while she's there. She does maximize on that company match, but she doesn't do any additional savings, whether it's through her own IRA or a spousal partnership or a spousal IRA. She doesn't have any of those alternative financial vehicles to help with her retirement goal. Ultimately, that 33-year break, she does save about $500,000, which you can see in that gray bar for the final account balance. However, spacing that whole entire thing out over the period of the longevity of how long she would live, she comes out to about $31,000 per year to live off of. So this is taking just the side-by-side scenarios that vary across all ways and seeing how the finances can have a big implication when you're not making the financial decisions or having the conversations to save for retirement, because it's very easily to see that in $94,000 a year out of your retirement account versus a $31,000 will have a huge variance on how satisfied or your living options for when you retire. Now, this is the great part, or some would say great, and I actually think it's, it's changed with the current environment we are in the pandemic. But one of the great things, and a lot of times, people do a great job raising their kids. They're 18 years old, they go off to college or they, leave the house. But we all know that things happen in people's lifetime, and especially when you're younger, that you can't control, and you may not have the financial stability to support yourself by yourself. Or for example, in this current environment, pandemic, a lot of kids are relocating home. And this is where I say the word to use is either no, or you set up financial boundaries. The reality that you have to have these conversations with your children, if they are thinking about moving home, is because most of the time they end up becoming a financial burden on you, whether it's feeding them as basic as having them at your dinner table, to utilities and payment. They're going to be moving back into the house. It's probably going to increase some of your cost of living. And ultimately, they're going to take away your savings account, which in the future would be needed for either yourself, your spouse, or maybe an older grandparent that you need to take care of. And so the statistics right now are that 32% of 18 to 34-year-olds live at home. And I always just say no. Like, just learn to say the answer no whenever questions are asked. Can you have some money? Can you stay with them for free? If they're going to be staying with you, it's okay to say you have to give in some money to our living, whatever it's the mortgage or paying a small rent fee. You can help them in also making financially smart decisions. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you need to take care of yourself financially when your kids start growing up, because it will help you in the future, and it also will help them start becoming more financially responsible. So sitting them down and having that conversation of what's your budget, that 50-30-20 rule. Do you have credit cards? And that you can have those conversations because you would like to see them financially set up, so you can be financially set up if anything does happen in the future that you need to prepare for. So my biggest suggestion, I always say no. Obviously, in this current environment, it's very hard to say no to. But if you're going to say yes, it's setting up financial boundaries and having conversations of how they can be smart financially for themselves, and then also to help you in your life decisions. Why is this, again, so important for you to have these conversations is because of the older generation that most likely a lot of people will be taking on the burden of being caretakers or putting them somewhere in a home, nursing home, care, health costs. It becomes very expensive the older you get. So these are some statistics. 7 out of 10 people will require long-term care in their lifetime. Only 1/3 of adults over 40 have money set aside to pay for their long-term care. Ultimately, what's resulting in, if you don't financially save for yourself, usually the younger generation, i.e. your kids, are going to be the ones financially supporting yourself. 92% of caregivers are also financial caregivers, directly contributing to the cost of care or helping keep the recipient's finances in order. This is something that's also very, very important to have. One of the things that we talk about right now, especially, is a healthcare directive, and having that established for anyone who's older. And also, what people don't realize is anyone who's over the age of 18 years old. If you have a child who has left the house, you need to establish a healthcare directive in the case of an emergency. It's the easiest thing to have in your hand and to have on file if anything were to happen, so you can have the right and the ability to advocate in the case of an emergency. And that is applicable in 2 ways. For kids over 18 years old, if they're still on your insurance plan until they're 26 years old, theoretically at the age of 18, they're considered an adult. So having a healthcare directive allows you that ability to make health decisions if in the crisis of need. And then at the other side of it, for the older generation, if they're starting to face some forgetfulness, dementia, anything of Alzheimer's, establishing a healthcare directive for people older than you that you are going to be caring for is very important in the case of an emergency. One website that you can go to start establishing the healthcare directive is called caringinfo.org. Again, caringinfo.org. It's a very easy process to set up. We just say take a photo of it and make sure that you have a paper or some record of it with you at all times in the case that an emergency were to happen. So let's say you have made it, you've worked, you've raised kids, you're financially stable, you're helping with your parents or your parent-in-laws, you're going into retirement. What happens in this life stage? What keeps you up at the later end of your employment or your savings career? Social Security. So for females in particular, these are 2 statistics. Women have less access to defined benefit plans and rely more on DC plan and Social Security for retirement income. 82% of women entitled to survivor benefits and their own retirement benefit would have received a higher monthly amount if they knew they could delay taking their own benefits until the age of 80 or age of 70. Now, the scary part, and what you can kind of read on the bottom, is that the bottom statistic of the fact that 82% of women are entitled to higher benefits is straight from the Social Security Administration. What has happened with the Social Security Administration? So a few things. In 2015, they laid off 1,500 of their field staff who were the most knowledgeable when it came to claiming Social Security and helping you maximize your benefit. 72% of individuals actually claim Social Security at a reduced benefit before their full retirement age, which ultimately impacts your yearly ability of finances to supplement your retirement life. One example of this, and this is just to give you a little bit of a thought process. You don't have to agree with me on this, but I believe that Kris Jenner is a very, very lucky woman. She's very smart. Reason I say this is she's got 3 Social Security options that she can potentially use to maximize her benefit. One, she's self-employed. She's been self-employed for a long time, so she has her own Social Security benefits to tap into. She was married to Robert Kardashian for 10 years, and he passed away, so she actually has a survivor benefit that she could consider using. And then she was married to Bruce Jenner for over 10 years, so she has a spousal benefit that she could consider using. Another reality that people do not realize is that if you are divorced, you can take your spousal without notifying the ex of the fact that you're going to be taking a spousal Social Security off of their Social Security. They do not receive notification and they do not have to sign off on it. So again, Kris Jenner, she's got her own Social Security to consider, she's got a survivor's benefit to consider, and then she has a spousal benefit to consider. So she has options, and a lot of people don't realize that there are options out there. So what we always suggest is partnering up and getting a second opinion. MFS does have resources that will help you understand when you should claim, if you're having any conversations about spousal, survivor, or individual benefits. We have great resources that lay out all that information, with the idea of going into Social Security, having a little bit more of an understanding and realizing that there are options out there that could help you maximize your monthly payment. Especially as well in this current market environment. This is one of the areas that people lean towards when they are financially unstable or they financially can't support themselves in this short time period, is leaning on Social Security. Again, the ultimate goal is to make sure that you're financially setting yourself early on so you don't have to tap into Social Security at a reduced benefit before your full retirement age. Having the conversations will only benefit you earlier on. Now, say we all cost the same, females, males, if we say we're the exact same, people are arguing, you know what, we're side by side the exact same, we're going to live the exact same. This page actually shows the fact that females live longer, and we do cost more in our retirement years than our male counterparts. So much so that the woman will spend an additional $108,000 in the last 4 years of her life while she is alone, and that does not include long-term care that she most likely will need. The reality is, for females in particular, to set up ourselves financially is very important because we do outlive our male counterparts and we are more expensive at the end of our life. So even if you're to take the same exact profile of a male being 2 years older, life expectancy, we usually outlive 2 years, the medical cost does come out to a different over that Medicare premium of $83,000. So females, as much as we like to argue we're the exact same, we do live longer, and ultimately we do cost more money to have we cost more money to keep around in retirement. So it's really important to make sure, again, when it comes to making any of these life decisions, it may seem minimal in the moment and something you just do, but having the conversations to set yourself up financially in the future is very important because we do live longer. So this is our little joke of the whole thing. You know, obviously looking at this cartoon, the evolution of this lady growing up, and she ends it saying, well, that sucked. The irony of this thing is it does not have to suck. It's not even the irony. The reality is we are very fortunate in the world we are today, and with the support of Loretta and Golden and McCarthy, that we can have these conversations. You can be proactive about having financial decisions to make, and also just knowing that the resources are out there. So ask the questions, get a second opinion, and make sure you do your due diligence to ensure that you can be responsibly financially independent when it comes to retiring, so it doesn't have to suck. And then I do believe 50 is the new 40 and 60 is the new 50. Hell, maybe 60 can be the new 40. I don't know. I believe that when we give ourselves permission, we can live with an excitement and heat and passion that most women in previous generations were unable to attain. This is the final page for the presentation, and I think it ultimately goes to show that, you know, we are evolving. We're very fortunate in the world we live in today, minus everything that's been going on. And the opportunity to take responsibility of your financials is here. And there is no better time to have a moment and just walk through things, have the conversation, and make sure that you're set up. Or if you know someone who needs the ability to have those financial conversations, to make sure that they are set up and making sure that they can achieve their retirement goals. With that, I was going to say thank you very much. I hope everyone enjoyed the presentation. I'm going to pass it back to Loretta. I will be emailing resources as well on the topics that we discussed. So if there's any questions, always refer to Loretta. She'll be more than happy to answer anything.
Thank you, Gigi. That was great. We absolutely appreciate your time today. And I thank you for sharing some of your personal experiences with us to help drive the topic home. Obviously, that resonates with us. We think about all the things that we go through in each of those life stages. And I think the one nugget or the takeaway that you referenced many times was being financially selfish. And that's really critical. We need to share awareness, and we want to make sure that this information is available to you. If you could just advance to that last slide. As I mentioned earlier, our team at Goulden & McCarthy is always available to help answer any questions that you may have. So if there's anything that we can assist with as a follow-up to this presentation, or any other topic that is relevant, certainly reach out. And with that, I will close. You all have a good afternoon and stay well and healthy. Thank you.